Hey, welcome to another After School Tales. Today we're going to be diving into the story of McKenzie and her weird situation. McKenzie's mom went ahead and submitted this, and when I was talking to her, she asked that I go ahead and leave out where they exactly lived, but they do live in the Appalachian Mountains. So, we're going to start off with explaining. McKenzie is a 10-year-old girl, and she lives in a rural farm area. So you've got the mountains and her farm, it's probably 50 square acres. It's a good sized farm. They grow all kinds of stuff: tomatoes, corn, pumpkins, watermelon. I mean, just about everything you can imagine. Now, Mackenzie's got a long driveway, so she gets dropped off on the school bus and she walks this long driveway. It's not quite a mile, it's a little less than that. But there's apple trees. There's apple trees that are on the corner of the road, and then they kind of line each side of the road as she's walking up. So it's quite beautiful out there, in fact. So she gets off the school bus. It's one of the last days of school, and she's walking. She's walking up her road. There's no other kids with her, and she's used to this walk. And as she's going, she thinks she catches something out of the corner of her eye. Deer, there's all kinds of animals out there. There's deer, there's bears, but, nothing ever really bothers her. Animals don't really bother humans that much. In fact, they're kind of scared of humans. Even the black bears will they'll kind of look at you, but then if you keep going, you're pretty much fine. So Mackenzie wasn't really, too worried about this. So she's walking and she sees what she thinks is maybe a deer, but it's way too small to be a deer. So she barely caught it. Maybe it's a rabbit. But anyway, she keeps going, and as she's going up, her driveway, she stops. The apples, they're in bloom, but she seems to get tired. She doesn't have allergies, and she's used to playing all day, and her mother was explaining that she's not really allowed to have tablets or any kind of computers use. She's not allowed to watch the TV or play video games. When she gets home, she has to stay outside. So Mackenzie, she's used to being outside after school a lot. In fact, she built a little bit of a fort. They were telling me about her fort. When you're a kid, or if you're a little kid, you go out there and you kind of just gather up cool stuff, big logs, and you kind of make a teepee. That's what this is. This is something she had been working on, ever since she could remember. So she felt kind of tired, and she was walking. She decided to veer off her road to the left through a little bit of a field towards the gardens. Her family has a large farm area for produce they sell, and then they also have a little bit of personal gardening area, and that's where Mackenzie's garden is. So Mackenzie, she takes her backpack and she goes into her fort, and she's got her little stuffed animal in the corner, and she's got a table. She can, heat up some tea. She's pretty practical, so she starts making some tea, and she's gonna have a little tea party, with her stuffed animals, imaginary friends. And as she's making the tea, she becomes even more tired. And the sun, it's after daylight savings time, and so she's got a good bit of time before she has to be in before dark. So she went ahead and she started to think, well, maybe I'll just grab a few blankets, because it's still a little chilly, and I'll just, go to sleep. And she remembers kind of looking for her blankets, but then she felt really drawn towards the garden. She wanted to, not, she didn't want to, but she kind of felt like she needed to go towards her garden a little bit more. She was growing, they had just planted wildflowers. She had a few tomato plants, but there's no fruit on them or anything. And she had a cucumber plant. And so she's getting ready to go and inspect her garden just because she felt the need to check up on it. And then all of a sudden she feels like, well, maybe I'll just sit down and, watch the garden and, just take in the scenery. And she started to feel sleepy. And right as she was getting ready to just kind of lay down for a second, everything freezes and McKenzie can't move. Now, one thing that McKenzie and her mom told me was that the moment time kind of froze, she didn't hear anything. All the birds had stopped making their bird calls and the wind had stopped. And so she's starting to get really scared because she can't move at all. She's trying to move her legs, she's trying to move her arms. She would even like to move her eyes side to side, but she can't seem to do that. And so it's very silent. She can't move. And she feels warmth everywhere. She doesn't feel the wind on her skin or anything. She's not uncomfortable. She just is frozen, even though she still feels warm. Well, as she's sitting there, panicking, she sees directly in her vision, looking at her garden, she sees these 6 foot tall, these are not 6 feet, 6 inches tall, miniature deer. And these miniature deer, what they're doing is they're kind of walking up and they're in a little group. There's about 5 or 6 tiny miniature white-tailed deer. And at that point, she stopped being afraid and she started really looking at these deer. They couldn't be 6 inches tall. There's no such thing as 6-inch tall deer. Well, she's looking at the deer, and the deer, they don't seem to be eating anything in the garden. In fact, they seem to be digging in the dirt. And they're taking their little mouths and looks like they're actually planting stuff in her garden. Well, through all the excitement of the deer planting stuff and the weird scenery and everything, she all of a sudden comes to, and she can move again. And she can feel the wind, she can feel everything, she can see everything, turn her eyes. So she's quite relieved. But then all of a sudden, flash, she wakes up. And she wakes up in the exact spot she was frozen. But she kind of lifts, but she's laying on the ground when she comes to real quick. And there's no deer. She looks around, there's no animals. It's now getting really, really dark. The moon's starting to come out. And she runs home. She tells her mom. And at first, McKenzie's mom, she could see McKenzie scared. And she's like, McKenzie, everything's okay. You can come back inside. Take a bath. Get something to eat. We'll talk about it. And McKenzie ends up just going to bed. And her mom, her mom doesn't believe she saw 6-inch deer. But she does know something happened to her. Well, the next day is a Saturday, and the mom gets up, starts making breakfast. McKenzie gets up, and they turn and they look outside, and they could see McKenzie's fort. They can see McKenzie's garden. But in her garden is a large scarecrow that looked like it had just sprouted out of the ground. And this scarecrow is, it looks like a normal scarecrow, except for, weirdly enough, it has antlers, deer antlers on this weird scarecrow. And so that's pretty much the story, y'all. A strange thing to happen, and then where the deer were burying stuff, a scarecrow comes back the next day. So that's the story of McKenzie and her weird garden moment. So next time, y'all kids, you get done with school and you see something crazy out of the corner of your eye, and don't be afraid. Just write it out, and then you never know what'll happen. The Appalachian Mountains are a strange place, but they can also be a really cool, magical place for those little kids that respect the land and stay out and love nature. So, okay, y'all. Well, that was After School Stories. That's our second one. And next week, I'll bring you something else. We have a lot of parents and children. They're contacting me with these remarkable stories. So, yeah, we'll see you next week. Take care and love your family. Be nice to everyone. And make good grades for your parents.